Undercover boss visits his jewelry store, stops cold after hearing a salesman lie to a customer. Julian Morgan stood in front of the gleaming glass facade of Morgan Jewelers, South Haven branch, staring up at the silver-lettered sign that bore his family name. 12 locations, 3 generations. And yet, it had been almost 2 years since he'd stepped foot inside this particular store. The reports had been conflicting. Revenue was steady, foot traffic is strong, but something in the customer reviews had begun to rot. Whispers of exaggerated provenance, complaints about overstated value, mentions of lab-grown diamonds sold as natural heirlooms. Julian couldn't shake the feeling. Not as a businessman, not as a legacy. So he'd traded his polished navy suit for a muted gray sweater and faded khakis, trimmed his signature salt and pepper beard down to stubble, swapped his Cartier watch for a plain leather band. In the tinted reflection of a parked SUV, he adjusted his reading glasses and pulled his cap lower. To the world, he looked like a tired man searching for an anniversary gift, not the CEO of one of the most respected jewelry chains in the Midwest. Today, his name wasn't Julian Morgan, it was Miles Dawson, and he was just another customer. What he didn't know was that in just a few steps, he would hear something that would change everything he thought he knew about his store, his staff, and the true cost of silence. Julian stepped through the glass doors of Morgan Jewelers' Westbridge flagship store with a quiet breath, feeling the familiar scent of polished wood, subtle floral cologne, and velvet-lined display cases wash over him. It was the same scent he remembered from decades ago when he'd stand beside his father on Sunday afternoons as a boy, watching him help newlyweds pick out rings with care in every word. But today wasn't a memory, it was a test. A tall, charismatic young man with styled hair and a sleek black suit approached him with a gleaming smile. "Good afternoon, sir. Looking for something special today?" Julian kept his tone soft, carrying the careful nervousness of his fake identity. "Yeah, actually, it's my 20th anniversary next week. I'd love to find something timeless. A ring, or maybe a pendant?" The salesman extended his hand confidently. "I'm Caleb. You've come to the right place. We've got pieces with stories, not just stones." That line stuck with Julian. Stories, not stones. Caleb led him toward the center of the store, where a spotlight bathed the glass case in warm, golden light. Inside, a single ring sat on a dark blue cushion, an oval-cut diamond surrounded by delicate rose gold petals. Caleb leaned closer, voice low and reverent. "This one? It's from our heritage collection. That center stone was mined in Sierra Leone over 100 years ago, natural, untouched, cut by hand in Antwerp. It's one of a kind." Julian blinked slowly. He had seen this model before. He knew the vendors, the exact SKU. It was lab-grown. High quality, yes, but grown in Singapore and cut by laser in New Jersey. He said nothing, only nodded with quiet curiosity. "What kind of certification does it come with?" Julian asked, trying to sound like a cautious buyer, not someone who had read the lab report 3 months ago. Caleb gave a quick grin. "We've got paperwork, of course, though the original print certificate is at our head office for safekeeping. We can email you a copy, but most of our clients, they fall in love with the story, not the science." Julian tilted his head. "And the warranty? Is it covered for life?" Caleb hesitated just slightly. "Well, let's just say we stand behind our pieces. I mean, who wouldn't? Something like this isn't just jewelry, it's legacy." Legacy. That word hit Julian harder than it should have. As Caleb continued his pitch, layering the mystique with mentions of royalty, rare cuts, and generational value, Julian found his eyes drifting to the details. A subtle scratch near the clasp, a certificate tucked beneath the counter with the words CVD Lab Diamond half covered. He wasn't angry, not yet, but something inside him began to stir. Not as a CEO, as a son, as someone who once promised his father he'd protect the name Morgan, not let it become a brand built on illusion. He stayed calm, asked a few more questions, nodded when Caleb casually mentioned a one-day-only anniversary discount that shaved 10% off the price, a price already marked up double for the tale it carried. "Could I think about it for a bit?" Julian asked softly. Caleb's tone didn't falter. "Of course, But just so you know, this one has been viewed 3 times today. Can't promise it'll still be here tomorrow." Julian smiled faintly. "I understand." As Caleb stepped away to tend to another customer, Julian took a step back from the display case. It sparkled under the lights. Elegant, clean, convincing. And it was a lie. He looked up at the name on the wall, Morgan Jewelers, in silver serif letters. He wondered how many customers had walked through these doors with real trust in their hearts, only to leave with stories instead of stones. He wasn't here to fire someone, not yet. He was here to know how deep the cracks ran, and by the time he left, he'd either bury the truth or bring it into the light. But first he needed to listen, because the truth had a voice, and in this store, it was about to speak. Julian wandered quietly toward the side displays, feigning casual interest in a row of sapphire earrings. He wasn't really looking at them, he was listening. Behind him, Caleb was chatting with another customer, retelling the same romanticized tale about stones with a soul, but Julian's attention shifted when he noticed someone step beside him, a woman, maybe mid-20s, with tied-back hair, minimal makeup, and eyes that looked like they saw more than they said. Her name tag read Isabel Tran. She didn't smile like Caleb. She didn't speak with rehearsed flair. But when she looked at the ring Julian was still holding, the one with the century-old story, her expression changed. "That one's popular," she said gently. Then after a pause, "It's not natural, though. It's CBD." Julian blinked, glancing toward her. "Sorry?" Isabel lowered her voice. "Lab-grown, chemical vapor deposition. It's a good stone, clean, consistent, durable, but it's not from Sierra Leone. And the warranty on that setting is 6 months. Just wanted you to know." Before Julian could respond, Caleb's voice rang out, sharp and tight. "Belle, I've got this. You can go check the stockroom or something." Isabel straightened slightly. "I was just clarifying." "I said I've got it," Caleb snapped, shooting her a pointed glare. She didn't argue. She just gave Julian a look, brief, quiet, but filled with a kind of restrained apology. Then she walked away, her steps steady, disappearing through the back curtain. Julian stood still, fingers resting lightly on the edge of the glass. The silence left in her wake said more than words ever could. Caleb was back beside him in seconds. "Sorry about that. Isabel's still pretty new, a little too focused on the technical stuff. I always say jewelry's more than what it's made of, right? It's about meaning, about connection." Julian looked at him, unreadable. "You mentioned earlier this stone was over 100 years old?" Caleb grinned. "Absolutely. That's what makes it so special." He didn't flinch, didn't falter, just doubled down. Julian nodded slowly. "And it's natural." Caleb's smile widened. "Hand-mined and cut by masters." Julian's throat tightened. He wasn't surprised Caleb lied. That part had been obvious from the start. What struck him was how quickly the truth was shut down the moment it tried to speak. Isabel hadn't accused, hadn't embarrassed him, she'd simply corrected a fact. And that somehow was a problem. Julian had built Morgan Jewelers with the belief that trust wasn't something you sold, it was something you protected. The stories were meant to honor the truth, not bury it. Now, watching Caleb return to his practiced smile, Julian began to feel something colder beneath the showroom lights. Not anger, not yet, but a quiet resolve. He slipped the ring gently back onto the velvet display pad and looked at Caleb. "You said there was a consultation room?" Caleb gestured toward the back. "Of course, we can go over financing, package options, maybe I can even sweeten the deal." Julian followed him, glancing once toward the stockroom curtain where Isabel had disappeared. A voice like hers didn't belong in the shadows. It belonged at the heart of the company. He just didn't know yet how deep the darkness went. But he would, because from this point on, the story wasn't about a ring anymore. It was about a system that punished honesty, and the one man who still believed it could be rewritten. The consultation room smelled faintly of polished wood and citrus cleaner, like they were trying to bottle up trust and sell it by the ounce. Caleb motioned toward a leather chair across from a marble-top desk. Julian sat slowly, keeping his hands folded on the table, his expression still polite, still Miles Dawson. Outside the glass door, the showroom glittered with display lights and crystal reflections. But in here, things felt colder, sharper. The edges of the illusion were more visible. Caleb opened a drawer and pulled out a sleek black folder. "So here's what I can do," he said smoothly, flipping through a pre-filled packet. "Normally, this ring retails at $8,200, but if you put down a deposit today, I can knock off 8%. And I'll throw in complimentary sizing and our legacy protection plan." Julian tilted his head slightly. "What's the legacy plan?" Caleb paused. "Extended care, lifetime maintenance, basic resizing, cleanings, and even setting adjustments. Just a few exclusions. Is that in writing?" Caleb hesitated, then slid a one-page glossy brochure across the table. It was vague. Decorative fonts, generic photos of couples laughing under sunset skies, and a small paragraph in fine print that seemed to contradict half of what Caleb just promised. Julian looked up. "This sounds more like marketing than coverage." Caleb smiled easily. "Look, no plan covers everything, but our goal is to make customers feel taken care of. Most people don't even ask about the fine print." Julian's fingers rested quietly on the edge of the brochure. "But I'm asking." Before Caleb could reply, another voice interrupted from across the room. "Everything all right in here?" Julian turned to see a man leaning in the doorframe. Mid-40s, sharp suit, immaculate tie, slight frown like smiling costume extra. Trent Bishop, store manager. He hadn't moved when Isabel spoke up earlier, hadn't even looked up from his phone. But now that a sale was being negotiated, now he was engaged. "All good," Caleb answered quickly. "Mr. Dawson here is considering our legacy package on the Sierra ring." Trent stepped fully into the room, hands in his pockets. That one's been moving well this quarter." He looked at Julian, his tone measured. "Caleb's one of our best. You're in good hands." Julian offered a polite smile. "I'm sure." But even as he said it, his gaze lingered on Trent. There was no warmth behind the manager's eyes, just a calculation. The way a man studies numbers on a ledger, not people in a room. "Just let us know if you have any questions," Trent added. "We're proud of the stories behind our pieces. Every one of them has meaning." Julian nodded slowly. "Stories are powerful." Trent lingered a second longer, then turned and walked out without another word. Julian watched him go. Not once had the man asked who Julian was, not what he needed, not even how he felt about the product, just a drive-by to validate the transaction. The message was clear. If the customer seemed ready to sign, nothing else mattered. Julian turned back to Caleb. "Let me ask again. That diamond, you said it's from Sierra Leone?" Caleb didn't blink. "Yes, mined ethically. We work with a trusted supplier, legacy stones passed down through generations." Julian leaned forward slightly. "Even though it's a CVD?" For just a breath, Caleb froze. Then, "I'm not sure where you heard that." "Another associate. She said it plainly, and she was right." Caleb gave a tight chuckle. "With all due respect, Isabel's not fully trained yet. She gets confused between our categories sometimes." Julian sat back, studying him. Or maybe she's just telling the truth. Caleb's face tightened. He closed the folder. "Look, Mr. Dawson, I don't know what this is about, but if you're not serious about buying, I'm serious," Julian cut in, his voice suddenly heavier. "Just not about buying lies." Silence pressed in between them. Through the glass wall, Julian caught a glimpse of Isabel moving behind the counter. She wasn't smiling, but she was still there, still working, still standing. A quiet part of him wondered how many times she'd spoken up, and how many times she'd been told to step back. Julian rose from the chair. "I think I need some air." Caleb stood too. "Do you want me to hold the ring?" Julian looked at him, long and steady. "Number, I think I've seen enough." Then he turned and walked out, not just of the consultation room, but of the polished illusion that had once been the pride of his father's legacy. Outside, under the glow of the Morgan Jewelers sign, he could still see the heart of what they'd built. But somewhere along the way, they'd stopped protecting the truth. And now the man who started it all had returned, not for revenge, not for control, but to save the story from itself. Julian stood by the entrance of Morgan Jewelers, staring out through the large glass windows. Outside, a soft wind picked up specks of dust and light, blurring the reflection of his own face in the pane. But inside, the air was still, thick with the residue of something dishonest. He took a long breath, then turned around. He didn't rush. He walked slowly back into the heart of the showroom, past the displays, past the polished counters, past the smiling photographs of couples in love framed beside diamond earrings and bridal sets. Past it all, until he reached the center floor. Caleb saw him first. The salesman's face stiffened, confusion mixing with a flicker of unease. Trent, still seated behind the glass of his office, didn't look up yet. Julian reached up with both hands. He took off the faded cap, then pulled off the glasses. One motion at a time, he removed the layers of Miles Dawson until all that remained was the man beneath it all. The man whose name was still carved into every glass panel, every velvet box, every front door sign. Julian Morgan. The floor fell quiet. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Mr. Shaw," Julian said calmly, locking eyes with Caleb across the floor. "I believe you owe me an apology." Caleb's face drained of color. Sir, I didn't realize." "No," Julian cut in, "you didn't." That much is clear. Customers had started to notice. A few paused mid-conversation. One woman tilted her head, whispering to her partner. Another customer looked over her shoulder from the bracelet counter. Julian turned toward the front desk. "Isabel," he said, his voice firm but warm, "could you call all staff to the showroom floor? I'd like to address everyone." She blinked, then gave a single nod and picked up the phone. The intercom crackled. "Team members, please report to the showroom floor for an all-staff meeting." Trent's door creaked open behind him. Julian didn't look back yet. One by one, employees began to filter in, from the storage room, from the design studio upstairs, from the back corridor near the shipping office. They came quietly, shoulders straight, some with uncertainty, others with curiosity. Finally, Julian turned toward Trent. The store manager had stepped out, arms crossed, a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Morgan," he said smoothly, "we weren't expecting—" Julian raised one hand. Trent went silent. "Let me make something very clear," Julian said, his voice cutting through the room like the edge of a finely set stone. "What I experienced today as a customer, being misled, upsold on false promises, and manipulated with half-truths, is not how Morgan Jewelers was built, and it will not be how we move forward." He looked around, his eyes landing on each employee one at a time. "I founded this company on something my father taught me. When people spend their money with you, especially on something as meaningful as a ring or a necklace, they're not just buying a product, they're trusting you with a piece of their story." His voice dropped lower, steadier. "And today that trust was broken, not by one person, not by one sale, but by a system we let slip away from what it was supposed to be." No one spoke. Even the customers in the room had gone still, watching like they were witnessing something they didn't expect but maybe needed to see. Julian turned fully to Trent. "You've been running this flagship location for how long?" Trent straightened. 2.5 years. "In that time, how many times have you reviewed the accuracy of what your sales team says on the floor?" Trent hesitated. "We have regular briefings. I trust my team to—" "That's not what I asked." A beat of silence. Then Trent looked away. "Not often." Julian nodded. "I see." He took another step toward the center of the floor. "As of this moment," he said clearly, "we are implementing a full audit of every diamond sold under the legacy label. Every product marked as natural will be verified by a third party. Every warranty sold as lifetime will be re-reviewed line by line and rewritten for transparency." A quiet gasp escaped someone in the back. Julian continued. "If you have knowingly misled a customer, this is your one chance to come forward, to speak, and to make it right. If you stay silent and we find out later, you will not have a second chance." He turned again to Trent. "You will submit a written report of all promotional scripts, training practices, and commission strategies used over the last year. Today, not tomorrow." Trent's jaw flexed. "Understood." "And Caleb Shaw," Julian said, turning back to the young salesman whose cheeks were now flushed with a mix of embarrassment and fear. "You're relieved of duty for now. We'll speak privately after the audit." Caleb nodded slowly, jaw clenched, but said nothing. Julian exhaled and looked around once more. Then his tone softened, just slightly. "This place, it's not just glass cases and luxury lighting. It's people, it's memories, and it's the truth. If we lose that, no sparkle in the world can cover it." And then he said the words no one in the room expected to hear from a CEO in a crisp white shirt, still smelling faintly of the subway he took that morning. "If any of you have something to say, something you've seen or felt but never had a chance to share, my office is open. Not someday, not in a review, now." No applause, no cheers, just a silence that meant people were listening. For the first time, really listening. And in that silence, the culture began to change. Julian closed the office door behind them with a soft click. The world outside the glass faded into muffled voices and shifting footsteps. But in here, it was just him and Isabel Tran, the only employee who had dared to speak the truth earlier that day. She stood stiffly near the edge of the room, her fingers intertwined tightly, still in her uniform shirt, with the Morgan Jewelers logo stitched just above her heart. Her eyes were calm, but Julian could see the weight she carried in them. Not just from today, from months, maybe longer. He motioned gently toward the seat across from his desk. "Please, sit." She hesitated for half a breath, then did. Julian stayed standing, moving slowly behind his desk, but not sitting. "Not yet. I owe you something," he said quietly. Isabel blinked. "Sir?" "A thank you," he replied, "for not letting the lie sit comfortably on the showroom floor." She gave a small, almost embarrassed smile, the kind people wear when they're not used to being praised. "It wasn't much. I just said what I knew." "No," Julian said firmly, finally sitting across from her. "It was exactly what this place needed." They sat for a moment in silence, a weightless quiet that hung between them. Not awkward, just full. Julian finally leaned in slightly. "Tell me, Isabel, how long have you known what's been happening out there?" She exhaled slowly. "Since my 3rd week here." He frowned gently. "That long?" She nodded. "At first I thought I misunderstood. Maybe I wasn't trained properly. But the more I listened, the more I realized. The stories being told weren't true. The diamonds weren't what they said. The guarantees, the legends, the push to close the emotional deal, it all felt like performance." Julian sat back, hands folded. "And Trent?" he asked. Isabel's gaze didn't falter. "He never told us to lie, but he never stopped it either. If a customer didn't push back, the story stayed. If someone questioned it too hard, they got sent to a different associate or told it was confidential sourcing. He calls it emotional selling." Julian's jaw tensed slightly, but he kept his voice calm. "And when you tried to tell the truth?" She looked down, brushing her thumb over the edge of her sleeve. "I got fewer commissions. My shifts changed. I got sent home early for energy mismatch. One time I was even told to let the narrative shine brighter than the specs." Julian closed his eyes briefly. "I stayed," Isabel said quietly, "because I believed in what the name meant. Morgan. This place was supposed to be about memories, about trust. I told myself maybe I could protect that. Just a little. Even if it was only for the customers who looked me in the eye and asked, 'Is this real?'" Julian opened his eyes. He nodded slowly, letting the words sit. "And when you spoke up earlier," he asked gently, "did you expect to be punished for it?" "I didn't think I had anything left to lose," she answered, meeting his gaze directly. "Not if we were already losing what mattered." There it was. Not anger, not rebellion, just quiet, exhausted courage. Julian stood and walked to the wall beside the window. It held a framed photograph, a faded black and white shot of his father, smiling with a young couple in front of the first Morgan Jewelers store. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he turned back to her. "Isabel," he said, "what if I told you that from today forward, your voice wouldn't just be allowed, it would be necessary?" She looked uncertain. "I'm not asking you to sell more," he said. "I'm asking you to lead." Her eyes widened slightly. "I want you to help build something new, a program, a team, a standard. Call it whatever you want, but I want you to be the reason no one else in this company has to choose between honesty and employment ever again." She opened her mouth, closed it again, then said softly, "Me?" "Yes," Julian said, "because you did what others didn't." For the first time since sitting down, Isabel's shoulders relaxed just slightly. "Are you sure?" she asked. "There are others here with more experience." "Maybe," Julian said with a small smile, "but experience means very little if it's built on silence. What you show me, that's integrity, and that's what this company needs more than anything else." She looked down again, but this time not in shame, just trying to hold herself steady. "Okay," she whispered. Julian offered a hand. She took it, and just like that, the first corner of the old foundation cracked, not with collapse, but with something softer, a beginning. Not a revolution in policy, a revolution in courage. Outside, the store was still humming, but inside this small office, something rare had just happened. Two people, one with power, one with truth, had chosen each other, and the rebuilding could finally begin. Julian stepped out of the office with Isabel just a few steps behind him. The showroom was quieter now, the kind of hush that follows after thunder. Customers had been gently escorted out earlier, and most employees were lingering by the displays, whispering in low tones, waiting for whatever came next. Julian walked slowly to the center of the room. Every step was deliberate. Every second counted now. He looked around. His voice didn't rise, but it carried. "Trent," he said, "get me every active sales contract from the past 12 months. I want them all printed and I want them reviewed." Trent Bishop, still standing stiff near the diamond counter, flinched. His expression tightened, but he nodded. "Understood," he said, walking briskly toward the back office. Julian turned to the staff. "No one is being fired today," he said calmly. "But make no mistake, today marks the beginning of a full audit. If you've sold something that doesn't match the truth, it's time to come forward." A few employees shifted uncomfortably. Caleb Shaw, the young salesman who had tried to spin a myth about the diamond earlier, stood with his arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes flicking toward the exit. Julian saw it and saw through it, but he kept going. "I'm not interested in blaming people for what they were told to do. I'm interested in knowing who wants to do it differently." Silence. Then slowly, a woman near the gift section raised her hand. It was Dana, late 30s, long braid, normally quiet. "I've had concerns," she said, her voice uncertain, "about the gemstone sourcing stories and the heirloom claims. But when I brought it up before, Trent told me not to overthink the narrative." Julian nodded. "Thank you for speaking up. That changes today." He turned to Isabel, now standing quietly near a jewelry case. "Isabel will be leading the transparency review team. Any one of you who wants to be part of resetting how we serve our customers, I want your names on her list by the end of the day." A ripple passed through the group. Some were surprised, others relieved, and one Caleb looked deeply unimpressed. Julian met his gaze. "If you're wondering whether the job still includes crafting fantasy stories to close a sale, it doesn't." Caleb rolled his jaw slightly, then looked away. Just then, Trent re-emerged from the back, arms full of printed contracts in labeled folders. "It's going to take time," he said, setting them down. "There are hundreds of files." Julian nodded. "Good, then we start today." He picked up the top folder, flipped it open, and scanned the itemized receipt. "Antique sapphire from Kashmir," he read aloud. "Do we have proof of that origin?" Trent shifted uncomfortably. "That's how the previous manager listed it. We didn't change the label." "Is that the truth?" Julian asked. "Or is that the excuse?" Trent didn't answer. Julian didn't wait for one. "Then add this one to the review queue and send a courtesy email to the buyer. We'll confirm the provenance or offer an immediate refund." A few employees glanced at each other. They weren't used to this. They were used to sales goals, incentives, and scripted phrases that skirted the truth just enough to be profitable. But not this radical kind of accountability. "Listen," Julian said, resting both hands on the glass counter beside him. "I know change is hard, especially when you've been told for years that stretching the story is how you survive. But we're not going to stretch anymore. We're going to stand." Someone in the back murmured, "Even if it costs us?" Julian looked toward the voice. "Yes," he said, "because if you're only winning by misguiding people, you're not really winning. You're just delaying the loss." That landed like a quiet truth, sharp and still. He could see it in their faces. Some were skeptical, some inspired, all listening. And then, just as he was about to move to the next folder, a voice from the corner spoke up. It was Malik, one of the newer floor associates, young, sharp-eyed, still in training. "I have a couple of contracts I've felt uneasy about," he said. "Can I bring them to Isabel?" Julian smiled softly. "You just did," he replied. A tiny shift. But it mattered. By the end of the afternoon, 5 more employees had stepped forward, some with questions, some with quiet confessions. Trent kept busy behind the scenes, organizing papers, noticeably subdued. Caleb, he lingered, arms crossed, silent, not confrontational, but clearly disinterested. Julian didn't push him, not yet, because this wasn't about punishment. This was about building something stronger. He looked around at the glass cases filled with light, at the rings and necklaces and watches, each one a symbol of something meant to last. And for the first time in a long time, he wondered, what if trust could be one of them? What if the rarest gem in this showroom wasn't behind glass? What if it was the courage to start again? He glanced at Isabel, now seated at a desk with a growing stack of folders, highlighter in hand. This wasn't just a review, it was a reckoning, and the rebuild had finally begun. By the time the sun dipped below the rooftops of downtown Westbridge, the name Morgan Jewelers had already started trending on platforms Julian barely used. He didn't need to scroll to know what people were saying. By morning, the phone calls began. Some were angry, some were confused, and many were grateful. But there was one thing they all had in common: they were watching. Inside the showroom, Isabel had worked late with Malik and Dana to finish the first round of contract reviews. They sat shoulder to shoulder at the consultation table, pages spread out like case files. A sense of purpose lit their faces, tired but determined. Julian watched quietly from his office, his sleeves rolled up, reading an email from a customer who had bought a Colombian emerald 3 years ago and was now asking plainly, was it real? He closed his laptop, walked back onto the showroom floor, and called a short staff meeting. "I know this isn't what you signed up for," he said to the circle of employees, "but this is the work that matters now. Truth isn't a sales strategy, it's the foundation we forgot." Malik raised his hand. "Sir, what happens if a customer wants their money back?" Julian looked at him steady. "Then we give it back." The room stilled, not with fear, more like the quiet before real responsibility takes root. He continued, "Some customers might not come back, but the ones who stay, they'll know what we stand for." Just then, Isabel stepped forward with a clipboard. "We've identified 17 contracts with questionable language in the product descriptions," she said. 8 of them list vintage origin with no documentation. 5 more sold natural stones that are likely lab-grown. Julian nodded, jaw firm. "Draft letters to each customer, transparent, respectful, and signed by me personally." "And Caleb?" Isabel asked quietly, glancing toward the back of the store. "He wasn't there." Julian paused. Earlier that morning, Caleb had cleared his things from the break room. No announcement, no confrontation. Just an envelope left on the front desk that read, "Not for me." Julian had read the note inside. It wasn't bitter, just brief. "Some people sell dreams, others sell truth. I know which pays better." Julian didn't judge him for leaving, but he knew what kind of company he wanted to stay. That same afternoon, a young woman walked into the showroom holding a ring box. Her name was Rachel, early 30s, mother of 2. She approached the front counter and asked to speak to someone about a story I saw on the news. Isabel greeted her with a soft smile and led her to a quiet seat. "My husband bought me this ring here last year," Rachel said, voice steady but emotional. "He passed away 6 months later. I never had the heart to question what he bought until I saw what your company's doing now." Isabel opened the box slowly. A delicate 3-stone diamond ring gleamed inside. Rachel whispered, "Can you tell me if it's real? Not just the stone, the promise behind it." Isabel looked at the serial number, cross-referenced the file, and then said gently, "Yes, it's natural, and it's real." Tears filled Rachel's eyes. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the diamond, for the honesty." Julian watched from across the room. In that moment, he realized the real business they were in wasn't jewelry. It was a memory, emotion, legacy. The truth was just the only way to protect it. That evening, as the team wrapped up for the day, Isabel approached Julian at the doorway. "We had a good start," she said, offering him a sheet of notes. Julian looked down, then back up at her. "It was more than good," he replied. "It was honest." He took one last look around the store, the spot where Caleb used to stand, the place where Dana now trained newer staff on how to speak with clarity, not mystery. The quiet corner where a young woman had just confirmed that her late husband had told the truth with a ring. Julian exhaled. They weren't done, but for the first time in a long time, they were on the right side of the glass. Tomorrow there will be more letters to send, more customers to call, and probably more revenue to lose. But somewhere in all that was the beginning of something far rarer than a perfect diamond, a reputation earned and a promise kept. Julian had expected the backlash, but what he hadn't expected was the quiet applause, the kind that didn't happen in press conferences or in shareholder meetings. It happened in the tiny moments, like when a mother brought her toddler back into the store just to thank Isabel with a handwritten note and a folded receipt. "You didn't just sell me a bracelet," she whispered. "You made me feel like I could trust someone again." The first week after the truth broke, the numbers dipped, as expected. Sales dropped by 18%. Some customers canceled pending orders. A few regulars disappeared without a word. But the reviews? They surged. Online forums lit up with comments not just about jewelry, but about ethics. Words like honesty, courage, and finally started appearing under the Morgan Jewelers listing. A viral tweet showed a snippet of Julian's surprise reveal alongside the caption, "Not all CEOs hide. Some show up and they fix it." Still, not everyone was ready for the change. 3 employees left quietly. One of them, Janice, had been there for almost a decade. "I can't do this new thing," she said in her exit interview. "Telling customers everything means fewer sales. I'm not built for that." Julian didn't stop her. He just shook her hand and said, "Thank you for your years here. I wish we had served you better." But for every person who left, someone else stepped up. Donna, who'd spent most of her career in the back room managing inventory, asked to be trained in front-of-house sales. Malik volunteered to start rewriting product descriptions, removing exaggerated language, replacing it with clarity and provenance. "This one," he said, pointing at a sapphire pendant, "it's lab-grown, and it's beautiful. We don't need a fairy tale to justify it." In the break room, a whiteboard was put up. Customer wins of the week. Isabel wrote the first entry in blue marker. "Explain the difference between moissanite and diamond." The customer smiled and said, "Thank you for not making me feel dumb." It wasn't flashy, it wasn't viral, but it mattered, and it spread. On day 9, a woman named Carmen walked in. She was in her 60s, wore a navy coat, and carried a small velvet pouch in her palm. She approached the front desk and asked if she could speak with the young woman who told the truth. Isabel came forward. "I bought this in 2001, Carmen said. "From your father." She opened the pouch to reveal a delicate rose gold brooch, its gemstone weathered with time. "It's not about money. I just want to know if it's what I was told it was." Isabel inspected the piece carefully, then walked to the back to consult the archives. Julian watched it unfold quietly from the side. When Isabel returned, she had good news. The brooch was real, a natural pink tourmaline, just as Carmen had been told. The woman smiled through misty eyes. "I knew it," she whispered. "I just wanted to be sure." Julian stepped forward and offered his hand. "Thank you for trusting us and for giving us the chance to prove you were right." Before she left, Carmen looked around the showroom and said softly, "It feels different in here, like the lights are warmer somehow." It wasn't the lights. It was the truth in the air. That weekend, a local journalist visited the store to do a follow-up story. She had one question for Julian. "Do you think your customers care more about price or honesty?" Julian paused for a long moment, then answered, "They care about what the price says about who we are." That line became the headline. Morgan Jewelers rewrites the rules. Honesty is the luxury they sell first. The article was shared by teachers, moms, veterans, students, people who didn't buy diamonds often, but who suddenly felt like this store belonged to them too. The revenue hadn't bounced back yet, but something far more important had: reputation. The kind you can't buy back once it's lost. The kind you only earn quietly, daily, honestly. And it started with a single sentence said in courage: "That's not true." Spoken by a 24-year-old employee who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Now Julian knew what he had to protect. Not the margins, not the image, but the soul of the business his father once built. The kind of place where being honest wouldn't make you an outlier. It would make you indispensable. And tomorrow, they'd take the next step to make sure that honesty wasn't just policy. It would become culture. 1 week later, Julian arrived before opening. The sky above Westbridge was still that early shade of quiet gray, the kind of morning where time feels suspended. He unlocked the front door of Morgan Jewelers himself, the old brass key still slightly stiff in the lock. Inside, the lights flickered on, warm, golden, soft. The showroom was empty, and that's exactly what he needed. He moved slowly toward the center wall, just beyond the diamond displays, where a blank space had been freshly painted. It was reserved for something special, a tribute, a memory, a promise. In his hands, he held a framed black and white photograph. It was his father, Thomas Morgan, captured in the late 1960s, offering a ring box to a nervous young man across the counter. There was no logo, no PR, just a handshake and two honest smiles. Julian stood still for a moment, studying the photo. His father had believed that trust didn't need polish. It needed presence. He remembered how the elder Morgan used to say, "People don't remember the cut of a stone. They remember how they felt when you handed it to them." Now Julian was ready to pass that same feeling on. He placed the photo on the wall, right where customers would see it when they entered. Beneath it, engraved in silver, a new plaque shimmered. "Trust isn't part of the story we sell. It's the story we protect." He stepped back, letting the silence hold it for a while. It wasn't a slogan, it was an oath. A few minutes later, Isabel arrived. She paused when she saw him, then followed his gaze to the wall. Her breath caught slightly. Her eyes glistened. Julian noticed but said nothing. Instead, he gently stepped aside so she could stand beside the frame. She stared at it for a long moment. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but sure. "Feels like it belongs here." He nodded. "So do you." She turned to him, trying to find words, but he shook his head with a soft smile. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said. "Not for being perfect, but for refusing to stay silent." Isabel swallowed hard. "I didn't know if anyone would ever listen." "You didn't speak up to be heard," he replied. "You spoke up because it was right, and that's what makes it powerful." Just then, a delivery driver walked in early, a man with tired eyes and a clipboard. He stopped when he saw the framed photo, looked at it for a second, then said casually, "That the founder?" Julian nodded. "He looks like someone who'd tell you the truth." Julian smiled. He was. After the driver left, Julian lingered a little longer, watching the morning light warm the floor of the showroom. Employees began to arrive one by one, and many paused in front of the new photo. A few placed their hands over their hearts. Some just nodded. The message wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. This wasn't about guilt. It wasn't about shame. It was about returning to something that never should have been lost. A place where good people were not just protected, they were elevated. Telling the truth didn't make you naive. It made you a leader. That afternoon, an older customer named Mr. Fletcher returned with his granddaughter. He had bought his wife's first ring from Thomas Morgan in 1975. Now he wanted to help his granddaughter pick her first necklace, and he wanted Isabel to help them. "I heard what you did," he said quietly to her. "My wife would have liked you." Isabel blushed, caught off guard. But Julian saw it, that tiny, unmistakable spark in her eyes, the beginning of something bigger. Later that night, as the store closed, Julian stepped outside one last time and looked back through the glass. The photo on the wall caught the reflection of the streetlights. He could almost hear his father's voice again, soft and steady. Always protect the story people can't see. That's where trust lives. Julian took a breath. Then he walked into the night, not because his work was done, but because it was finally in the right hands. Tomorrow they would open the doors again, and this time they wouldn't just be selling diamonds. They'd be protecting something far more valuable. By the third week, something unexpected stirred beyond the walls of Morgan Jewelers. It didn't come from customers. It came from the industry. A series of op-eds began appearing online, not overt attacks, but sharp enough to sting. One luxury competitor posted a video under the title, "Lab-grown isn't a lie, it's innovation." Another ran a headline implying Julian's pivot to full transparency was a publicity stunt. When ethics become marketing, are honest jewelers just the new trend? The message was clear. Julian had disrupted something sacred, not the sale of diamonds, but the illusion that often came with them. The backlash grew quieter, more insidious. Whisper campaigns, eye rolls from old colleagues, former partners distancing themselves. Inside the store, employees began to feel the tremor. A young staffer asked Isabel nervously, "Are we going to lose clients because of this?" Julian overheard. He didn't step in right away. He let the question sit, because it was fair, and fear only holds power when you try to silence it. That evening, Julian called an internal meeting. No projection screens, no reports, just people. He stood at the center of the staff circle, sleeves rolled up, tie gone, his expression calm. "You've probably seen what they're saying," he began, "that we're weak for being honest. That truth costs too much." He looked around the circle. Eyes met his, unsure, searching. "They're not wrong about one thing. Telling the truth is expensive. In this industry, it costs relationships, reputation, even short-term profit." He paused. "But losing trust? That costs everything." A hush followed. No one moved. Julian continued, his voice steadier now. "Let them call it marketing. Let them say it's performative. Because we're not answering them in headlines. We're answering in moments, in how we treat the next couple who walk in how we explain every certificate, every alloy, every guarantee." He nodded to Isabel. "She taught me something I forgot, that people still care about the truth. They just need someone to show them it's still real." And then he unveiled a new idea. No fanfare, just two simple words printed on a velvet black invitation card: the Truth Box. A week later, Morgan Jewelers hosted their first Truth Box event. No champagne, no celebrities, just long wooden tables lined with sample diamonds. Natural, lab-grown, simulated, each placed in transparent boxes. Next to them, clear labels, full transparency. Where did they come from? What they cost to produce? How they differed under pressure, light, and age? Customers walked the line with curiosity, not confusion. Children tapped the glass, wide-eyed. Couples leaned in to compare. A woman in her 60s whispered to Julian, "I wish someone had shown me this when I was buying my first ring. Maybe I wouldn't have spent years wondering if I was fooled." Julian nodded. "That's why we're doing this now." A local journalist attended, hoping for a controversial quote. Instead, she found something quieter. She watched as Isabel explained a synthetic sapphire's heat tolerance to a teenage boy buying a necklace for his mother. A single dad asked which metals would last longer for his daughter's allergy. She didn't publish a takedown piece. She wrote, "It wasn't a showroom, it was a classroom. And in that room, trust felt oddly contagious." The next day, sales ticked up again. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough to know that people were still watching, still listening. Julian met with Isabel that afternoon in the back office. "Do you regret any of this?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He stared out the window toward the street, people passing, some familiar, some new. Then he said, "No, because if we hadn't changed, I'd be reading customer reviews with a stomach full of knots, wondering which lie I accidentally signed off on." She smiled quietly. "We still get things wrong," she said. "We do," he nodded, "but now we admit it. That's the difference." They sat in that small silence, the kind that doesn't feel empty but earned. Julian knew the backlash wouldn't vanish, but neither would their clarity. And as more customers came in, drawn not by sales but by sincerity, he realized something else. The industry wasn't pushing back because they disagreed. They were pushing back because they were scared, because deep down, they knew truth wasn't a tactic. It was a threat to everything they weren't ready to fix. And Julian? He had already chosen his side. By the start of the second month, the rhythm inside Morgan Jewelers had changed. It was subtle at first, a slower pace at the counters, longer conversations with customers, fewer rushed signatures. But for those who paid attention, it wasn't slowness, it was care. And Julian Morgan, standing quietly near the staircase that led to the second floor, noticed it in the smallest of gestures. A young staffer offered to print out a gem certificate without being asked. An older couple was being gently guided through the difference between 14K and 18K gold, without pressure to upgrade. A child offered a loupe to examine the sparkle of her mother's birthday pendant, not to sell, just to share the magic. Julian didn't interrupt those moments, he simply watched. Because that's what legacy really is. Not something you say, but something others repeat even when you're not in the room. One morning as the store opened, Isabel Tran stood in the new staff training room, a softly lit space tucked behind the main floor, once used for vendor storage. Now it had become the heart of the new Morgan Jewelers culture. On the screen behind her, a single line in bold white letters read, "Don't just sell the sparkle. Earn the trust." 10 new employees sat before her, notebooks open, eyes sharp with curiosity. Some were fresh out of college. Others had come from rival jewelry chains, tired of the pressure to upsell what they didn't believe in. Isabel looked around the room. She wasn't nervous, not anymore. She started, "We used to tell stories to sell diamonds. Now we tell the truth, and that story is enough." They leaned in. No one checked their phones. Julian walked in quietly from the side door. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. He found a chair at the back. Just another listener. Isabel continued, "There's no script for integrity. You earn trust one answer at a time, one moment of honesty at a time. That's your job now. That's your power." She clicked to the next slide. It showed side-by-side images of a natural diamond and a lab-grown one. Below each, origin, lifespan, price, everything a customer deserved to know. Julian felt something shift in him. Not pride, relief. It was working. Not because of him, but because of people like her. People who didn't wait for permission to do the right thing. After the session, he waited until everyone had left. Then he stepped forward slowly. Isabel looked up, smiling. "You didn't tell them I was here," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Would it have changed anything?" He chuckled. "Hopefully not." They stood in the quiet room together. Sunlight filtered through the window, casting long shadows on the wooden floor. In the corner, a framed quote hung, one Isabel had insisted they print and place in every staff room across all locations. "Honesty doesn't make you different in a day, but it makes you irreplaceable in a lifetime." Julian read it again, even though he knew the words by heart. He pulled a folded note from his pocket, handwritten that morning, and set it on the table in front of her. "For you," he said. She opened it. It read, "Thank you for not staying silent. Now it's your turn to keep the light on." She looked up, eyes damp. He nodded once, then turned and walked toward the exit. That day, Julian didn't return to the executive office. Instead, he walked through Westbridge slowly, alone, stopping briefly outside the old jewelry store his father had once owned. It was now a bookstore, but the windows still sparkled in the morning sun. Julian smiled, because sparkle fades, but trust endures, and now it had found its rightful place, not in gold, not in diamonds, but in the hands of people who believed that truth wasn't just worth telling, it was worth rebuilding everything for. Sometimes the hardest truth isn't what you uncover in others, it's what you finally admit about the system you built. Julian Morgan didn't step in to sell more jewelry. He stepped in to rescue something far rarer than diamonds: trust. And the lesson he left behind wasn't printed on receipts or certificates. It was carried in a quiet way. Customers smiled on their way out, knowing they weren't buying a story, They were buying honesty, because in a world full of sparkle, the real luxury is being able to believe what you're told.